to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Board Member Connolly?
Here.
Board Member Lucero? Board Member Ritter? Here. Board Member Tillman?
Here.
Board Member Teeter?
Here.
Board Member Knuckles?
Here.
Board Member K. Reynolds? Member Calderon?
Here.
Board Member C. Reynolds? Board Member Jones? Here.
Thank you. Brings us to the consent agenda. Does anyone wish to remove anything? Do you have any comments on the consent agenda? A motion?
Move to approve the consent agenda?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Passes. And that takes us to our items for information. Item number 9, the federal agenda program.
Item number 9 is just information, just a update and kind of a presentation on our 2022 federal legislative platform document. BCAG has maintained a contract with Ferguson 2007-8 year. Lobbying BCAG, and we came on and are kind of piggybacking with the county. We've been working with them over the years to help staff try to secure additional discretionary federal funds under the transportation programs there. We've been pretty successful in that we have secured about $19 million for the first Highway 171 project. Got that road constructed. We were also successful getting about the last couple of years, we haven't been too much with them, just mainly because the Highway 70 project, which was one of the top priorities over the last several years, got fully funded. Have any projects kind of in. So at that point, though, now where we do have some projects that we are going to be focusing on working with the Ferguson Group, and that'll include the Valley Rail Passenger Extension Project. Also be working with getting funding for electrification of our transit fleet, state mandate to put our bus fleet over to by 2040, charging them. Then there's also a project we're kind of helping out a little bit, support-wise with the county, and that's right now, we're just getting our kind of lobbying materials put together for those projects. The surface bill that passed last year, the bipartisan project program has about $570 billion in funding, a lot of new funding for transit, a lot of new funding for rail, a lot of funding for electric. So we're just kind of getting started again. We'll be getting our kind of lobbying materials together, and we'll be sharing those with. I know Christy Moore is going to be mad because she's en route to this meeting, but she got delayed, so she was going to. Might walk in at any minute, so I'm happy to address any questions the board might have. Those questions answered.
Do we have I know they handle the federal issues. Do we have a state lobbying group that we work with as well, or is that?
We don't,
Okay.
and haven't, mainly because most of the programs in California are pretty straightforward, and our staff's done a great job getting funding, and so it really hasn't been necessary The federal side, it's been
Up until 2017, we didn't really work with any kind of lobbying group at all.
7, 8. No.
Okay.
I should say, we have had state lobbyists in the past, when we were working on 70 and dealing with some issues. Never received it. Working with the Ferguson group.
So you think working with the Ferguson group is beneficial?
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you. And just, what is their fee?
Their annual contract for us is $68,000. And the way it's kind of set up and structured, BCAG is kind of the regional agency, because for all the cities and counties are member agencies of BCAG, we kind of are the head of the contract. The county then has their work and projects that they do, and then, of course, some of those, blend with what we're doing on the transportation side. If cities would like to, come on board, we can set up a meeting with Chrissy to talk about what you would like to do at your city, and then they would come up with a fee, and it would be part of that overall contract. They can help too with, obviously getting grant funds at the federal level. They can also provide staff support to developing those grants, preparing the grants, because those are often pretty difficult, can be complex, so they'll help do that too.
I can personally say that I think that they do a fabulous job. Privileged enough to go to DC with Christy right after the fire on behalf of Paradise. She actually did pro bono work for Paradise for 2 years after the fire, because we had no money, and we now contract with her. But she really knows what she's doing. I was very impressed in DC.
Christy has been the person we've always worked with at the front. Has a lot of knowledge about our region.
So I can testify that it works, because if you're there and another county's not, they're year after year after year, have their attention. It's like they call you, hey, you're gonna get this funding. Been there 14 times. A lot of work when you're there. You go from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. Christy has it set up. But if you put a face on it, you're more liable to get money. So, fortunately, I could never talk Warville into hiring a lobbyist.
Like, I know we gotta move on to other items in the agenda, but when Christy does get here, we can let her jump back in and speak a little.
No more questions, we'll move on to item 10, Line advertising update.
We're providing an update today on the first full-size ad, part of our expanding advertising agreement, and the image seen, and then we have another. On one of our fixed route last week. These ads are a result of our agreement with Lamar Transit, which manages the advertising on our buses, stops, and shelters. And the expansion of this agreement will generate revenue to them. We just wanted to share this exciting update, and we're looking forward to future ads.
You, Dad.
Well, staff are gonna get a call from the TV news before you know it. This is well covered.
So how long is that contract for on the side of the bus? Is that a year contract? Is it a?
This one is for 6 months.
Okay. And if they decline, then, how hard is it to take that off and put something new on? Easy? Wow. Okay. So it's not paint.
And while it looks like the people riding the bus can't see out their windows, you can't even, I guess, tell from the inside, you don't even
Wow.
see anything
Okay.
on the windows, so it's pretty good technology to use, so.
Cool.
Does the wrapping, sorry. Right here?
That's stock, used to be stock, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
Lamar purchased it.
Any other questions?
We should expect to see several more buses. There's all this size, but pretty good interest in. We do the tails now, but after.
Guess I'm gonna use Attaboy Plumbing from now on. Is that right? Too bad, Abel.
Okay, moving on to item number 11, the draft 2023 FTIP.
Good morning, Board. The draft 2023 Federal Transportation Improvement Program has been prepared and is available for public review. The BCAG Board is scheduled to adopt the FTIP at its next board meeting on September 22nd. As the federally designated metropolitan planning organization, it's one of the regular programming responsibility charged for BCAG is to prepare this document every 2 years. The purpose of the FTIP is to identify all transportation projects that have federal transportation funds or require some type of federal approval from the Federal Highway Administration or Federal Transit Administration. The FTIP also identifies all regionally significant projects regardless of funding. The FTIP is a programming document, the action program to BCAG's long-range regional transportation plan and sustainable community strategies. It covers the next 4 federal fiscal years, beginning this October 1st. 21 projects have been specifically identified for an approximate total of $195 million, significantly less from the previous FTIP because the Highway 70 corridor is no longer in the FTIP. All projects have to be consistent with or specifically identified in BCAG's long-range RTP-SES. The FTIP also includes an air quality conformity determination that staff distributes to its interagency consultation review group made up of FHWA, FTA, EPA, and Caltrans. We've actually already received concurrence on our conformity determination. An information item, it's available for public review up until the board adopts it. Once adopted, the BCAG board can amend at any board meeting. And staff will schedule another public Zoom workshop next Thursday. And I actually plan on being on the September 1st Farmers Market outreach with information on the FTIP and other planning and programming activities by BCAG.
Thursday market or farmer's market?
Thursday
Oh, okay.
night, Thursday evening.
Yeah.
When it's
Not the
especially
Saturday
hot.
morning.
Back for adoption next month.
Public notice will be in the newspaper for adoption. And everything's posted online.
Thanks for Yvonne. Item number 12, the Beeline mobile app update. Amy?
Board, so thank you for letting me provide you an update with what's going on with our mobile app, process. As the transit industry continues to direct efforts towards modernization of equipment, methods, and procedures, one area of focus for Beeline is the integration of mobile ticketing application into the passenger experience. During the 1920 fiscal year, BCAG began working with Token Transit to develop a mobile app fare app for passengers. The app went live in October 2020 and enables riders to purchase, store, and activate tickets on their smartphone. Since then, the app usage has increased significantly. While the increases are encouraging, the actual usage of Token Transit currently reflects about 9% of the total B-Line ridership month to month. Staff would like to see, token transit use increase and have deployed efforts to encourage riders to download and try the app. First, we've increased our marketing efforts. In the spring of 2020, we hosted several outreach events in Chico, Oroville, Paradise, and Gridley, and Big. Staff used these opportunities to provide information on the token transit app, and data showed a significant increase in app use, especially in March 2020. We were encouraged by this increase, and we are making token transit the focus of our outreach efforts for the remainder of the year, including the Chico Downtown Market on the 1st and the Salmon Festival in Oroville on the 20th. We increased our social media posts and have made available a QR code that goes directly to the app, so people can just click the code and app store they have to get the app. We promoted it on handouts like this, and we also find that we have on the table that they can just do the QR code right there. There's a how-to video also available on our line website and our YouTube page. Secondly, we've created online portals. We worked with Token Transit to add several web portals, which will allow agencies flexibility with bulk purchasing, sending out passes, and other user incentives. So these are agencies like Far Northern Regional Center and View College. Right now, they have a portal for Paradise students where they are offering free 30-day passes for cost to the students who are in Paradise and coming into college. An additional portal may be added later for the general student population of View College. And we also have been in conversations with Chico Unified School District to develop their web portal page. So our official launch date for the Token Transit web-based portals was August 1st. So that is, do you have any questions?
So did you say, how many people use the mobile app?
Right now, it's about 9% of the riders.
They make a big difference from a convenience standpoint, so I mean.
Yeah, we've got have had a lot of great feedback from people that are using it, and people, when we have them, like when we're interacting with them at the event, they're very excited about it. They'll do it right in front of us again.
And no for buses.
Like in the airport, a lot of people are checking it with their phones, right? It's the same type of deal, right?
Yeah, everybody. Sometimes parents will come by and will say, get your kids to load this app because they're less likely to lose their phone than their paper pass for the bus, so that kind of helps them.
Thank you. Timing, Christie.
You're up.
Sorry. We haven't moved to action items yet, so we'll go back to item number 9 and give us your.
Can I put my glasses on?
Yeah, you can. You need.
I had a 2-hour drive up
Oh, you did Zoom?
here. Is this on? So he already went over everything for me,
Kind of. I mean, I went through just
He gave us
the agenda.
our history
Okay,
working with
okay.
you.
Basically told us how great you are.
Okay, great, then I'll just leave. No, I apologize for being late. Haven't driven up here, and actually, this is my first time here. I actually plugged the old address in, for your old board meetings, and then I realized, oh, I have to come here, and then, got delayed on the way, so sorry about that. So John went over everything, in terms of coming back, onto the federal platform and starting to advocate in Washington, D.C. So this is the regional platform that goes in front of the Board of Supervisors as well, with a few of BCAG's priorities on there. A lot of what we're doing this year is taking advantage of the amount of infrastructure money that is coming out of Washington, D.C., either through authorizations, through earmarking, which is back. The county as well as the town has been town of Paradise has been very successful in that realm, and so we're hoping to continue that forward for BCAG priorities. The other thing is that you have some projects that are back onto the table that line up very well with where the administration is going, as well as where Congress is going. And you have that little thing called the IIJA, the infrastructure package, which is putting a significant amount of infrastructure investment into the federal budget for the next 5 years. It's really important to understand that that money is over 5 years. It's not ARPA funding, it's not CARES funding, where local agencies had to kind of grab it before it went away. This is sustained over at least the next 5 years. I think a lot of these programs will actually stay around even beyond that. It's very similar to the last stimulus package that came out of Washington in the Obama administration. The big difference here is that most of this will come down to locals. The other stimulus package, the ARA funding, if you remember that package, a lot of that went to programs that came through formulas to states that then came down to locals. This is different. These are new programs where there is direct access. Some of it is formula, some of it is coming down through the states, but the majority of it will be actually through just direct grant applications or direct funding straight to the municipalities at the local level. So it's a bit of a game changer in that capacity. It's also over multiple modes of infrastructure. So you're talking transportation, water, wastewater, energy and power were definitely the biggest winners in the package, as well as transportation. Those were the two biggest sectors of infrastructure that we saw the most new programs coming out of. And also rural investment in rural. So there's some more categorizations. There's actually new programs devoted just to rural communities and rural areas that we'll definitely want to take a look at, line projects up for BCAG, as well as any of you as individual agencies and members of BCAG as well. So a lot of that is what we'll be doing, advocating on the regional platform in DC. And then also a lot of what we've started to do is work on those grant applications. So any of your agencies have the ability to work with TFG as well as our grant staff to figure out where those grants are, to understand how to go get them, to support in that process, write the grants, do the strategic planning for them. There is a lot of confusion out there in terms of what can be applied to, how to apply for it, when you should apply for it, and really taking a strategic look at what is available plus your needs is something that we're looking forward to working with each of you guys as an agencies, individual agencies, as well as BCAG as a whole. So, do you guys have any questions?
It used to replace the water tank, that's different fire companies use, federal, state, local use.
Yes, fire districts?
There's, the district uses it, the state uses it, that's used by fire, and it's in a private community.
Yes, so the other thing that I didn't talk about was the new funding coming out of the IRA, or the Inflation Reduction Act, which just passed. So there is a lot of utility funding in that, in particular on the power side and the energy side, but some of the last sections to be added to that final bill did look at additional funding for underserved areas or areas that don't have water supply. So that's new program funding, but existing program funding, there's definitely funding for water tanks for whatever purposes. Interesting enough, the National Special Districts Coalition actually came together and brought members of the water districts as well as fire districts to understand the need, water supply need for fire suppression, whether that's urban fire suppression or wildfire suppression. To basically look at the demands on the water system from a water supply perspective, as well as a water conservation perspective, because that's changing the way that our water systems are working, and combining that with what the fire departments and the fire districts need. So there's actually a proposal that is going to just specifically look at that, water supply for fire. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The other one is, what about maintenance? The county bridges,
That's trickier. It is through some formula funding from the federal side. The federal the federal agencies kind of have gone away from that bridge maintenance, perspective, but you can utilize some of the grant programs to do that. Maintenance is tough from a federal perspective to come in, fixing buildings, they'll do that, but maintaining, infrastructure can be a little bit more difficult to make that argument for a federal investment, but it's not unmanageable.
Still here.
Anybody else?
Is there money in there for big projects?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm gonna say something, and people here are gonna probably throw something at me, but, you know, we've got this high-speed rail thing going on in California. Maybe some of us love it, some of us hate it, okay? But that's kind of installed. They're starting to work on it again. Is there money for stuff like that, or is that just purely a state project? You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
High-speed rail?
Yeah, so yes, there is transit funding, available in the normal budget, meaning the normal programs. And then in addition, there's additional transit programs that were created under the infrastructure package. So, specifically to high-speed rail and to a state program, as large as the California high-speed rail, it's a little different question.
Right.
But in terms of smaller projects, rail is definitely something that did see an enhancement or an uptick in the amount of investment.
We're looking at possibly doing some rail work up
Yeah.
there, and so would there be funds to help out with that project?
Absolutely. I mean, and what advantages is there are significant state funds too, so it's gonna help leverage those funds. So if we can get any level of federal funds, and I think Surface Act talks about extension of passenger rail in more rural areas like ours. So, well, and I know we'll get state funds, so if we get some federal funds.
So we're gonna go after some of that.
Yes.
Good.
And there's some of that included in the Inflation Reduction Act as well, from an environmental perspective in terms of emissions reduction, so on and so forth. So there's a little bit in there. I'm not saying a tremendous amount, but.
And one more question, what about, infrastructure for airports?
Yes, actually.
Say we wanted, somehow we could get passenger service back to Chico Airport. Would there be funds to upgrade a terminal or a
Yes.
runway, or to make it more advantageous to have passenger service?
Yes, there, under ARPA, with the infrastructure package, or under the IIJA, sorry, there's actually, they enhanced and created a, airport terminal program under the Airport Improvement Program, which is a larger umbrella program, under FAA. So there's, you can work through the regional FAA offices to secure some of that funding, as well as directly apply, and you can earmark it.
Yeah, I know our representative from Chico isn't here, but, that may.
What about sewer infrastructure?
Huge, there's a lot for sewer infrastructure.
Orville's looking at a $45, $60 million refurbishment.
There's a couple options there. There's grant funding, and there's also financing. So the financing, you're looking at that size of a project, can become attractive, especially if you have the population base to be able to look at that. The other thing that we're seeing is forgiveness, loan forgiveness, for disadvantaged communities or projects that serve disadvantaged, even if the whole community isn't designated as a disadvantaged community, if it serves disadvantaged populations of that community. So there's a couple of ways to look at that. There's also rural investment, USDA. Orville doesn't qualify specifically for USDA funding, but there's ways that we can kind of tweak that and work around that as well.
So how do we go to the next step then?
Our Ferguson group. I think I heard you produce that.
And I'm sorry, I was a little late. I was
No, that's
taking
fine.
phone calls, but,
John has my contact information, so you can just email him. You do have access to our services under the BCAG regional contract.
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So like right now, BCAG has the contract, county kind of has a separate portion of things.
Kind of.
Paradise is East City and on board and talk about have issues to work on, and then as she said, one of the big benefits is they provide people to help craft grant applications and stuff.
Sure.
I have this constituent that's hounding me about trails. How's the funding for trail projects like Colby Mountain?
Might have talked about Colby. It's actually pretty good. There, in the trail projects are kind of interesting. The programs will be devoted to traditional trails, but then there's also ways that you can incorporate that same concept into larger infrastructure type projects. So we actually were able to do, you can kind of combine them up and have that multi-benefit. And in some cases for Butte County, the access to federal lands significantly helps you in that regard, because there are programs that are specific to any type of access to federal lands from a transportation perspective.
Yvonne and I talked to you offline about the Colby Mountain. I don't know if you're super aware of that.
I already have.
We already have.
I just figured
Yeah.
he would want me to.
Yes, we've talked about it, yeah. I've sent him a couple grants that are potential. You can earmark that too.
One question. Oh, excuse me.
That's okay.
What entities in Butte County do you consider disadvantaged communities?
It's a good question. It's not my consideration. There are several different ways that can be interpreted. It's all data-driven, and there are maps that look at the demographics and population, and those can vary from agency to agency to be declared disadvantaged community. And the other thing that when they're looking at unincorporated areas, they'll just look at the discrete populations to say that this community, even if it isn't an incorporated town or a city, is disadvantaged, or this neighborhood is disadvantaged. And in fact, this facility was built utilizing a program that looked at the demographics. I think it was,
New Market Tax Credit.
yeah, but I don't know which street it was. If it had been located on the other side of the street, it wouldn't have qualified, but because it's located here, it qualified. So it gets that discrete, where it'll go into neighborhoods looking at those populations.
So some of the farm labor residential complexes are considered disadvantaged.
I would assume so.
And make any provisions.
Yes, so anytime that a project or a program will touch a disadvantaged community or help enhance it or benefit it, we look at that and incorporate it into anything and everything that we do. It's a big priority for this administration, and we're seeing that carry into almost all types of funding that are coming out, is to have that, there's a large infrastructure program, transportation infrastructure grant program, called RAY. It used to be called Tiger. It used to be called Bell. That changes depending on who the president is, quite honestly. And so under the RAYS program, we actually saw that written in as a qualifying factor for projects to be funded. And we're talking highway projects. So looking at, it's sometimes a difficult thing to do when you're looking at a large intersection. How does that benefit either racial equality or demographic equality or economic equality? And all they said, DOT said, we just want to know what you're doing. Even if the project doesn't benefit it, we want to make sure that the community is benefiting it, and that there's actions being done within that community to address those inequalities.
Well, even though the farm worker community is really, it's not within the city limits, we advocate for.
Mhm.
Is Gridley gonna be included in any,
I don't know specifically if Gridley qualifies as a disadvantaged community. I would highly suspect that a large portion of it does. Any area outside of that, outside of the city limits of Gridley, in the unincorporated areas of the county, I would suspect it probably does in some categories.
would really welcome.
Sure.
But
can you just say, something specific? You know, I know we have the emergency planning and, you know, disaster planning always, but whatever happened with, like Garamendi's Escape Act and the, you know, the planning?
Yeah, the portions of that were actually included in the transportation infrastructure bill, which became the baseline for the infrastructure package. So the IIJA was actually built off the highway reauthorization bill, and then they just added all of the rest of it on. So portions of that are in there. We also saw evacuation routes and emergency planning added in to existing programs that they didn't necessarily call them out specifically. So the bill itself didn't pass individually, but a large chunk of it, almost everything, was incorporated somewhere in the mix of the full reauthorization in those programs.
Is there any priority in this latest iteration of the infrastructure process for communities which are one way in and one way out?
I wouldn't say, I wouldn't go as far as to say there's going to be a priority, but that's part of the storytelling of the program, of the application, is if you can start to distinguish yourself and saying, this is why that federal investment is there, because there is only one way in and one way out, and it starts to lay that out, and that reviewer is going to look at it and say, this is why the federal government needs to come in. So I'm not going to say that the grant programs are coming out and saying a priority is evacuation routes or emergency response, but it is parameters that are being built in that you can argue and use that as the base for the program. And we are seeing diversification of these grants being selected. The big grants are hand-selected by the secretary, so he will choose which ones go and which ones get those final allocations.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
We're very glad you made it.
Oh, thank you. One thing though, interesting enough, USDA brought it up to me specifically about Butte County, and we started talking about it with the county in terms of utilizing USDA funding to do it, which I've never heard of or thought about that. But they said even to take out a loan to do that. Well, taking a loan doesn't really benefit you in some cases, but it was really interesting for them to start to say, we're going to have a tremendous amount of money coming at us. We're looking at ways to put that into basic infrastructure and not what you would normally think of as community facility infrastructure from USDA.
Well, and they have the programs too.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Right. This is actually specifically having USDA actually fund the building of the roads. Yeah. That's what I said too, Yvonne.
Thank you, Chris.
All right. Thank you.
Brings us to item number 13, adoption of the 100% zero emission bus rollout.
Good morning, Board. Over the last couple of years, we've been talking about this transition to a zero emissions bus fleet, and this is an item that takes us one step forward in getting to that commitment of pursuing that program. Just before I get going, I just want to introduce, we do have a representative from our consultant CTE, Center for Transportation and the Environment. Nikki Rinaldi, LFD, is here, and she will jump in and help me if I blow anything in terms of what I bring forward to the board. She was involved on the team of folks that developed these two documents that I'm just going to briefly talk about. So back in 2019, the CARB adopted this innovative clean transit technology. So what it says is that was the legislation guidelines that said, okay, all public agencies have to move towards 100% zero emissions fleet by 2040. Part of that legislation is that we as a public transit agency have to submit a rollout plan as to how we're actually going to do that. So starting last year, we brought on the CTE, Center for Transportation and the Environment, to help develop two things. One is this larger document, which is the Zero Emission Bus Fleet Transition Study. And what this does is it looks at our entire facility, our equipment, our maintenance staff, and looks at some specific scenarios that ultimately we end up choosing to pursue in our final submitted plan, which is going to be the Zero Emission Bus Rollout Plan, for which the board is going to be. They identified, we narrowed it down to 4 different scenarios. One being an entirely battery electric fleet, Another one being 75% battery electric, 25% fuel cell. Another option, 75% fuel cell, 25% battery. And then the last solution would be 100% fuel cell, which is the hydrogen fuel option. Not surprisingly, the battery electric option is the least expensive of all alternatives. The range of expense and investment is anywhere between $88 and $112 million over the next 20 years to meet that requirement of being zero emissions. That's a pretty large number, and likely us moving forward and achieving those types of investments will depend on our federal platform. Some of these programs that we've been talking about already, some of the things that Christy's been talking about. We ultimately chose or believe the best solution is for us to pursue just a battery electric bus alternative, and that's the roughly $88 million alternative. That really works out to somewhere on the order of $4 to $5 million a year, which seems to some extent a little bit unreasonable for us to pursue. That's a lot of money to do on a year-to-year basis over 20 years. Nonetheless, there's a tremendous amount of state and federal commitment to developing these programs. I personally believe that hydrogen is going to gain a lot more steam in the coming years, and that the fuel cell option will emerge as a more attractive option. But what we're doing today is submitting our alternative that we believe is the best thing that we can start to achieve in meeting the regulation for the CARB. So what we have here is this zero emission bus rollout plan, for which a resolution is required by the board to approve and adopt as our solution that we're going to move forward with. And then we would submit this to the CARB and begin developing our investments. And we have a proposal request going to be going out here in November to buy some buses, electric buses, and charging equipment. We do have our underground infrastructure in place. We haven't pulled the wire, a conductor wire yet, to actually light up any chargers that we have. But that's part of the proposal request that we're going to put out in November, is to bring the wire in, buy chargers, buy a couple of buses, and start moving towards this 100% zero emissions fleet. That's really the long and the short of it. I'll just ask Nikki. Nikki, do you have any particular ideas or additions to that?
Sure. I'll just add a clarification on the ICT regulation. It's not quite worked out that the mandate is for a 100% zero emission fleet by 2040. The mandate is actually on the purchasing requirements, with the goal that by 2040, 100% of the fleet would be zero emission. But the way that the ICT regulation actually applies to your fleet is on requiring a certain percentage of your fleet to be zero emission up to the 100% requirement, which comes into play in 2029. And then additionally, as Andy pointed out, this requirement does create a significant increase in the estimated costs of your fleet and infrastructure expenditures in order to comply with the regulation. And that was one of the main points that we tried to highlight in your ICT rollout plan, which is what will be submitted to CARB.
Thank you, Nikki. Good clarification. So what's before you is a resolution stating that we're going to pursue the 100% battery electric option in resolution number 2022-2303, resolution of the Butte County Association of Governments approving a rollout plan for the transition to 100% zero emission public transit fleet by 2040.
Mr. Chair, the batteries don't have the range. Like if we wanted to extend service to Sacramento or something, battery technology doesn't exist to run a bus down. Isn't it short-sighted just to go completely on technology over the next 20 years? Range.
I don't believe it's necessarily short-sighted just from the standpoint, one, it's the most affordable option for us to pursue. Two, I believe this ICT regulation is a breathing, changing document. I would like to have more of a commitment from the hydrogen fueling and infrastructure, which I think is going to happen. I think it's going to take a few years for that idea to start moving in on the battery electric. So at that point, I think we would want to change our strategy.
So how do
This
you-
isn't going to lock us in.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
worried about. So that answers that, but
Yep.
I'm curious now, how are you going to, what are we gonna do, have a bus on the charger? Someone one's running out and it's getting low, then you throw another one on.
Well, the way it's gonna work, I hope, and I will be honest in telling the board that I am a believer in the electric technology. I'm not a believer in the infrastructure and effort that's being pursued in place to support it. I don't think we're there yet. Nonetheless,
I think the technology could advance.
it could.
Would make it more viable, but I'm just concerned that by all these buses, what are you gonna do? So I put them on a charger while the other one's out?
So the way.
There'll be a gap here. Explain it.
So the way that it's intended to work is that you have a size of battery on the bus that will accomplish a certain range. There's a range that is a sales range, and then there's a realistic range. In this area, it's extremely hot during the summer, and it's pretty cool during the winters. All those slave devices reduce the life of a battery. So fortunately for us, a 200-mile range battery really is only going to do about 120 before you need to get that bus back to the yard and charge it. Our routes and the length of our routes, fortunately, can accommodate that type of a range. Now, typically what that would mean is a bus would charge overnight, would go out in the morning, do its routing, and about the time that it's ready to be charged again, it's going to be at that percentage left that it's already done its routing and is due to come back to the yard. That's the theory of it. I will say that there are several agencies just like ours who have gone out and bought buses, and a lot of them are sitting on lots, not running, because there's a technology aspect to charging a bus that involves firmware and software on a bus and firmware and software on a charger. And when updates have to occur on firmware and software, lots of times the chargers and the buses don't talk to each other. That's the part of the infrastructure side that is significantly lacking. So what I'm really trying to do for us is drag our feet a little bit in buying these buses and bringing this technology in until we have a better commitment and a better understanding that we're going to actually be able to run these buses. And when they need repair or solutions for repair, whether it be software, firmware, or actual parts and pieces off the bus, that infrastructure's in place. I think it's coming.
Can I make another shot at it?
Yeah.
Then you're asking us to vote for a plan required by law.
That's fair.
Yeah, I can do that, because I have a friend bought an electric pickup, and he was towing his trailer, and couldn't get to a charger. What do you do, you know? It isn't what they told me to be.
I told.
In time, what we also have charging, potentially like Chico Transit chargers and other off-site locations too. They do have,
Yeah.
and it's growing
So,
technology where you can pull into the bus stop, there's overhead chargers or whatever.
it's not, really it's not my intent. I mean, we're kind of checking off the box here because we have to. At the same time, I really think it's important that we invest in a way that we can eliminate those types of concerns. There's a lot of people out there all across the state that are not thinking about those things. That's why buses are, large vehicles are sitting and they're not being run. That's why I say I'm a little bit, I'm I'm not hesitant, but I'm gonna be the last guy in the crowd that comes, that gets through the door and meets the regulation, waiting for these types of things to be worked out.
So correct me if I'm wrong here, but the resolution is referring back to the 2019 CARB decision. Isn't today when CARB is making a new decision regarding this, regarding the electric and the hydrogen? And what might be this afternoon when they meet?
I don't think so. I think that this regulation for 2019 is one that largely applies to public transit agencies and heavy vehicle. I think what CARB is going to be doing today is announcing that there'll be no new gasoline-powered cars sold beginning in 2035, cars. So I think it's a little bit different focus. It's a little different focus, yeah.
Maybe one other thing that we've talked about, too, is even though we're gonna move forward with conversion of the fleet, we're probably going to try to maintain 4 to 5 diesel-powered buses, because our argument's gonna be, tend to have fires up here on occasion, and we get called in to do evacuation, and we're not going to assume that electric bus is gonna be going up and down a hill somewhere and problems there, so we're always probably going to keep.
And I thought that allowance was built in there. It was just about the purchase of new vehicles.
That's correct. So part of the study that we did that is not required, but that we asked for CTE to take a look at, was this whole idea of redundancy and resiliency. Particularly because we do have a lot of experience around here with, beginning with fires and flood. We're fire and flood prone, and we're a kind of a poster child for that. In that process, the idea comes up of, well, what do you do if you have all, electric powered buses? Well, my opinion is we're not going to even rely on the electric buses. That's why we're going to keep our internal combustion engine diesel powered buses on hand. We're not going to dispose of them as quickly as other people might, particularly for that reason, because we have to assume that in a situation like we've seen in the past, it's possible the grid could not be functional for several days in specific areas. That is not going to work for an electric bus.
Is there anything built in, with the county, one of the major issues we faced was the lack of redundancy. So if we are moving to more electric based, is there funding that's coming down for backup chargers and that kind of infrastructure?
There will be. That's part of, I think that's going to be part of how the financial stream and the revenues are generated by the state to pursue this. As those types of things get talked about or happen, they're going to have to look at funding those types of solutions. So again, that's kind of a little bit of my feet dragging here and getting rid of internal combustion engine is, I'm assuming that's going to happen to us here again. And I'm assuming that electric buses that we have on hand are not going anywhere, and that we're going to have enough reserve internal combustion that we can provide transportation based on what we've seen happen to us. The other thing we're not transitioning out of is our paratransit vans. And our paratransit vans do a really good job at getting into and out of particularly difficult places. We met with CAL FIRE earlier this year and the county, and the two main concerns they seem to have about providing transit and transportation are Cohasset and Forest Ranch, Cohasset being kind of their number one concern. So we talked about, how would we provide some level of support in a situation like that? Those are our cutaway vans. So this doesn't necessarily apply to the cutaway vans either. So that's the other element of this, is we're going to be keeping a lot of those on board as well. So we're going to start incrementally bringing these electric buses and hopefully fuel cell for hydrogen in, but we're going to also keep a pretty large contingency of these older technologies on board until the technology and support structure catches up to.
Do those paratransit vans fall into the same category of the vehicles we're talking about today?
They can, but they don't have to.
So we're being asked to adopt this resolution because
Second, there has to be a clicker on them. They're so quiet, they scare the hell out of me.
I-
I almost got run over by a school bus the other day.
After the board votes, I'll just one.
voice vote, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
I will keep continuing to come forward as this thing marches along and try to give you guys the best possible, scenario of how we're moving forward and meeting what we're being required to do. So, thank you for your time.
And then just one final comment, and this comment may be out of line, but,
High-speed rail again.
No, it's not high-speed rail, I'm not talking about high-speed rail again, but, with all these electric, vehicles, laws, it's my understanding that, road funds are brought on by gas tax in California, is that right?
Yeah.
All the funds we get from the state of California to fix our roads and do roads in, Butte County at least, comes from the state of California, right?
A lot, and feds.
And that
Yep.
through fuel tax.
Correct.
So with all these new electrical vehicles, we're not gonna have as much people buying fuel, or has there been some, you don't have to answer this, but it's just, has there been some adjustment? Or where will new income come to work on our roads, because electric vehicles, are just as damaging to our roads as,
They're talking about taxing electric vehicles,
okay.
like an annual tax of some sort.
It's being studied.
That's
It's
what,
being studied, oh, good.
that's what,
Cleaner cars,
that's what's
cleaner
gonna
cars,
happen.
higher fuel efficiency, the revenue for gas taxes. All that.
Yes.
But they've been studying it since before I left Caltrans, which was 8 years ago.
Would be a really good study.
Yeah.
that's,
Anyway, just, that was more of a comment,
No, you're-
question, and so that's my concern, is, I'm
When-
all for electric vehicles, that's great, they've got issues, but if they're better for the environment, fine, but we still have to repair our roads, so.
your new electric vehicle is gonna ping some server somewhere every several seconds and tell how many miles you're putting on, and you're gonna get a bill. That's probably what's gonna happen, a registration for that vehicle, so they'll find a way to generate the funds, they always do. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, Andy.
Almost farther,
yeah,
things done,
yeah.
Yep. Item number 14, is there any member of the public that wishes to? All right, we are then adjourned till our next meeting, which is Thursday, September 22nd, here in the boardroom or via Zoom. Okay.